السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد، رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. رب زدنا علما، رب زدنا علما، رب زدنا علما نافعا. آمين. In today's session, we will talk about the manifestations of the intellectual decline. In the previous session, we understood our principle of history based on the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah does not change the condition of any nation until it changes the condition of its nufus. In other words, until it changes its intellectual condition. The rise of a nation or a civilization is based on the intellectual development and rise of that civilization. And the economic, political, military decline which we see are just manifestations of this intellectual decline. We said that the Ummah in the 4th and 5th centuries before the Crusades developed the potential of being colonized, the potential of slavery, the potential of intellectual slavery. And this can also be called, based on the Quranic terminology, at-tih, which has been mentioned about the children of Israel who lost their way in the desert after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delivered them from the slavery of Fir'aun. Their mission was to reach the promised land and establish Islam there, but they lost the way in the desert. It was not only a physical loss, but an intellectual loss as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called it tih, yatihuna fil ard. The Ummah is also undergoing the same problem, losing the way. So this tih is based on the potential of being colonized. And the conclusion we reached in the previous session, we summarized it in 2 points. Number 1, stagnation of the Islamic institutions in guiding the Ummah. And number 2, promotion of alien worldviews and ideologies. This was the conclusion of the decline which happened in the age before, immediately before the Crusades. And it resembles our times. Now this intellectual decline manifested in the areas of human life: economic, social, political, individual, the state, and all areas of human life, which led to the overall decline of the Ummah. And it must be focused again here that reflection, intellectual upliftment, and rise is the greatest form of ibadah. When we talk about ibadat, we only focus on rituals. We forget that intellectual activity and engagement is one of the greatest forms of ibadat, which leads to science and technology, civilization, advancement in military, advancement in weaponry, the theories which we put on table for mankind in the human sciences and knowledge, reflecting on the knowledge which was revealed from the seven heavens, Al-Wahi, in the form of Quran and Sunnah, and extracting the great meanings for developing human knowledge. These are all products of intellectual maturity. When we lack that intellectual maturity and we don't engage with it, we don't consider it ibadah, we fall into decline, as we are experiencing in our times. So, for example, the first ibadah which our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed was not prayer or zakah or hajj or these rituals, but rather it was the intellectual engagement, reflection, at-tafkir. The first ibadah which he performed in the cave of Hira, which has been summarized in the famous hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha in Sahih al-Bukhari. She says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would retire to the cave, yatahannathu fiha. He would perform ibadah in it. Wahi was not revealed yet. The obligations of Islam were not revealed. What form of ibadah was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam performing? This ibadah was tafkir. He was reflecting on the condition of his society, the corruption which had occurred in his society, and the higher questions of life and death. So the first ibadah which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed was at-tafkir, reflection. And no wonder that the great muhaddithun of Islam have always dedicated chapters to this important ibadah. Even in the basic books of Sunnah. For example, if you take a very basic book which every Muslim understands and reads, Riyadus Salihin of Al-Imam, the great muhaddith Al-Imam Al-Nawawi rahimahullah, you will see that from the beginning chapters, Al-Imam Al-Nawawi has placed a chapter about at-tafkir fi makhluqatillahi azza wa jal, reflecting on the great creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he mentions the famous ayat about reflecting on the heaven and the earth and the creation of this universe. So muhaddithun also carefully selected this chapter in order to encourage the ummah, the Muslims, to reflect, to think. This is what we have lost. We have lost this basic principle of civilization, intellectual engagement. For this reason, we are backward in technology. We are not controlling the wealth of the world. We don't have any positive role to play in the world, in spite of the resources Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us, both human resource, economic resource, the strategic locations of the Muslim world. We are far behind. So what we consider as sickness are just symptoms. They are just manifestations. The economic backwardness, the political despotism, the social corruption, these are manifestations of the intellectual decline. until we developed intellectually, the Ummah as a whole gives this collective effort of thinking, creating theories, engaging with this dunya. We have left the dunya for the West. We have retired to the caves. This will not work. And this is important, as I have mentioned, the rise of the Ummah is important for mankind. So we cannot live in ghettos. We have to engage with the world. We have to start thinking, produce knowledge, again, like we were producing in the Golden Age, great intellectuals, polymath scholars, both in revealed knowledge and human knowledge. So let's talk about the manifestations of intellectual decline in different areas of the human spheres, and take some examples from the history of this period which we are focusing, the Crusades and the 4th, 5th century. I said we are roughly covering around 2 centuries, 200 years. So the first manifestation of intellectual decline happened in the economic sphere. Economic backwardness. We must know and understand that economic development does not depend on availability or abundance of resources only. So economic development and stability is not only about resources. Even today, if you study economics and you reflect on the resources we have, the strategic locations we cover, the Muslim world, you'll be astonished to see that even in this weakness, we control the best locations, we have the resources, we have the oil, we have money. So we don't have lack of resources. Even human resources we have. What we lack is the economic policy. So the Muslim world, majority of them, particularly the Arab world, has given the control of these resources to the West, to the United States. And we know how they control the oil economy, and the dollar, the connection of dollar with oil economy. There are complexities involved, but this is a very common talk. Everyone knows this. So the problem is economic policy. Our rulers, those who are in control of this region, the Muslim world, particularly the heart of the Muslim world, Middle East, they don't have any proper economic policy. They only think about themselves. Their only goal is to secure their power. This was exactly the same in the period immediately before the Crusades. So the problem of corruption and illegal means of revenue, spending the wealth and utilizing the resources on their personal desires and protecting their power, was the main concern of the rulers in those times. And this is the concern even today. So correct economic policy means using the wealth and the resources to develop the civilization, like the West is doing. Like the Jews, they are using their money to protect their homeland, and they are spending money like water for their expansionist projects. So this is, they have an economic policy which it follows the worldview they have. But look at the Muslim world. How many rulers have this economic policy of utilizing the resources and money for developing this area, fostering Islamic civilization, protecting this area from foreign occupations and colonialism? They don't have these concerns. This was the same story in that age also. So these different types of taxes which were developed in that age to protect the poor, and even the Hujjaj, the pilgrims, would pay a lot of taxes on their journeys to Hajj, and the as we have discussed, we had this divide of the Muslim political authority between Sunnis and Shias. The Shia, like in our times, the Shia were also controlling strategic locations in the Muslim world. They had strong political entities like the Fatimids, and the Sunnis were also there, the Seljuks in particular. So, for example, we have the historians of this period mentioning these facts, that, for example, the Fatimids would levy different and oppressive taxes on the pilgrims, particularly the Sunni pilgrims, and those who were not able to pay, they would stop them from performing the Hajj. So, for example, Ibn Kathir rahimahullah has mentioned in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, we are using these original sources of history, particularly about that period. He says the Fatimids would levy oppressive taxes from the Hujjaj of Maghrib, in particular, in Egypt. Hujjaj who would come from the western part of the Muslim world. He says, وَمَنْ عَجَزَ عَنِ الْأَدَاءِ حُبِسَ. Whoever was not able to pay that tax, oppressive tax, he would be put into prison. وَرُبَّمَا فَاتَهُ الْوُقُوفُ بِعَرَفَةٍ. Or he would be stopped from performing the Hajj, not necessarily put into prison. And some of them would even miss al-wuquf in Arafah, which is the greatest pillar of Hajj. They would miss Hajj. So these rulers, they were whether Sunni and Shia, they were only concerned about consolidating their power, nothing else, their chairs. They had no great civilizational projects. They would never spend the wealth and resources, utilize the resources for these great civilizational projects. They were only concerned about themselves, like in our times. For this reason, some of these rulers, they accumulated a lot of wealth. And Imam Ibn Khalliqan and other historians, they have mentioned, for example, the Fatimi Wazir, the Fatimi Grand Wazir, Badrul Jamali, when he died in the year 515 after Hijrah, so again we are covering this period, he has mentioned how much wealth he left. He says, خَلَفَ 600 ألف dinar. He left in cash, in money, 600 million dinars. و250 إردبا دراهم. And dinar is gold coins. And 250 irdib of darahim. This was a measurement in their times. و75 ألف ثوب أطلس. And 75,000 pairs of clothing, so on and so forth. He has given a big list of the livestock, the money, the cash he left. Where did he accumulate it from? From the taxes, from the oppressive qawaneen and rules they implemented in their states. Because, see, it means they had money, they had revenue, they had resources. So usually we are made to believe that Muslim world is poor, we don't have resources, we don't have this and that. This is wrong. In those times, they had resources. Otherwise, a simple minister, we're talking about a wazir, not the king. How would he accumulate such wealth? But the problem was in economic policy. Economic policy. So their concern was not the Muslim world. Their concern was not freeing Jerusalem, Baytul Maqdis. Their concern was not strengthening the Muslim world or other great principles of our civilization. Their concern was only consolidating their power and accumulating wealth. And even the army, it followed the same path. It followed the path of their rulers, despotic rulers, and muluk Umara and the princes, they would loot the cities, they would implement the oppressive rules, and the army also became an enterprise, like in our times. So, subhanallah, the martyrdom of Sheikh Yahya Sinwar happened near where? It happened in the border of Egypt. So Egypt has the second largest army in the Muslim world. And Yahya al-Sinwar was just few kilometers away from Egypt, from the second largest army of the Muslim world. And it was not able to do anything. Imagine. Because the army is also corrupt. There are good people everywhere. There are certain sections of the society everywhere, whether it's army or ruling class. But we're talking about the majority of these institutions. So basically, the army also practiced oppressive measures in destroying the economy of the people. Poverty and famine prevailed. We'll come to that. On the expense of these rulers and armies, the ruling class becoming fatter and fatter. Tujjar also, the bureaucrats controlling those controlling the markets, they will lift the prices. The economic stability was destroyed for their own good. So this was the personal gains. So for example, in year 428, another important Mamluk historian, Ibn Taghri Birdi, he's a famous historian of that period. He says, وَبَاعَ رَجُلٌ دَارًا بِالْقَاهِرَةِ. He mentions this incident, that a person, he sold his house in Qahira, in Cairo. كان اشتراها قبل ذلك ب900 دينار ب20 رطل دقيق, which he had bought before for 900 dinars. Yani he had bought this house for 900 dinars. He sold it for 20 ratl of flour, for bread. وبيعت البيضة بدينار. The prices reached such levels that one egg was sold for 1 dinar, and so on and so forth. Yani, he says barley finished from the market. Barley was not present in the market. ثم عدم وجود القمح أصلا. We see the same in our times. So we have a certain section of the Muslim world, the ruling class, the state, which is flourishing, and the majority of the population is in economic decline. And this is important to understand, that the nation which does not have anything to eat will never stand for a great cause. A person who has a family and he has to work 3-4 jobs to meet the ends, he doesn't know when he leaves in the morning, will he be able to receive the sustenance for his family? He will not have big aspirations. He will not stand for anything. There are people who are exceptions, but generally speaking, for this reason, civilization develops only in places which are economically stable. So civilizational manifestations like the art and the culture develops in places where there is economic stability. Those who don't have even water to drink, they will never invest in the infrastructure, isn't it? So this became a great problem. The majority of the Muslim Ummah was in poverty, and they were concerned about how to meet the ends. They would never stand for any cause. So he has mentioned this historian, Al-Imam Ibn Taghri Birdi, rahimahullah. He has mentioned in the year 428, 449, about the destruction of the markets, the prices, the economic instability. So he says, for example, in the year 511, the prices reached so high that one handful of daqiq, one handful of flour was sold for 300 dinars. And by the way, this is the reality in majority of the Muslim world. Economic instability, particularly the Arab countries, not the Gulf countries. The Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, these countries surrounding the illegal state of Israel. They are not developed countries, they're struggling. So if the economic stability is not present, the Ummah will not stand for a great cause. So the ruling class, they spend the money, and this is, of course, money of the Ummah. The revenue of the state comes from the Ummah. They destroyed it for their personal gains, personal pleasures, and maintaining their personal power. For example, Al-Imam Ibn Kathir mentions Abu Nasr Ahmad ibn Marwan al-Kurdi, who was the governor of some areas in 453. He says, كان عنده 500 سرية سوى من يخدمهن. He had 500 slave girls. Imagine how many. He was the governor of the Muslim state. Doesn't matter whether Shia or Sunni. He was the governor. He had 500 slave girls. وعنده 500 خادم, and he had 500 servants. وكان عنده من المغنيات شيء كثير, and he from the singers, يعني the jawari, the slave girls who would sing for him, he had a huge number. مشتراها 5000 دينار وأكثر. He had bought it, and their value was more than 5,000 dinars, even more than that. 5,000 dinars is a huge sum. وكان يحضر في مجلسه من آلات اللهو والأواني ما يساوي 200,000 دينار. And he would spend on these the majalis, the gatherings of music and lahaw and pleasure. He would spend 200,000 dinars on it. Like in our times, see what is happening in Gaza every day, and look at some Gulf countries, some Arab countries, how they are organizing and spending money. They don't have money for Gaza. They don't have money for the Syrian Muslims. They don't have money to end these conflicts, but they have great budgets for organizing football. They have great budgets for inviting the prostitutes of the West to organize these concerts, so on and so forth. This is very common, and this was common in those times. So, for example, the Seljuki king, Malik Shah, famous Seljuki king, Malik Shah, in the year 480, organized the wedding of his daughter. Al-Imam Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, he mentions this incident and says, في المحرم منها نقل جهاز ابنة السلطان ملك شاه إلى دار الخلافة على 130 جملا. In this year 480 Muharram, in the month of Muharram, the dowry of the daughter of Sultan Malik Shah was transferred, taken to Darul Khilafah on 130 camels. Ummah is suffering, and these are great sultans. They have great contributions. But this was the common atmosphere. 130 camels, imagine. Mujallala bid-dibaj al-Rumi, which was covered by Roman silk. غالبها أواني الذهب والفضة. The majority of this dowry, 130 camels, 130 camel loads, the majority of it was the vessels of gold and silver. وعلى 74 بغلة مجللة بأنواع الديباج الملكي. And on 74 mules, horses, mules, and the Camels were used as means of transportation in those days. So how many? 74 mules load, 74 mule loads of silk, so on and so forth. And he has mentioned the amount of dowry which came for, or which was prepared for the daughter of Sultan Malik Shah. So this extravagance in pleasure, in maintaining their lifestyle and protecting their power, and not spending this wealth and resources in the correct path, which is the path of Allah, making the word of Allah supreme, strengthening. So strengthening the power is not only they would only think about themselves. It's not only by accumulating wealth. You must have a policy. You must have great people around you. You must have great people around you who are theorizing, who are thinking about the future. For this reason, all these states, and we are talking about when the Abbasid Khilafah was only in name, when the Abbasid Khilafah was a symbolic entity, and Ummah was already divided into these small states. They did not survive for long, except the Uthmani Khilafah afterwards. These Seljuks and Mamluks and Fatimids, they did not survive for long because their policy was not correct. So you must invest in military infrastructure, in weaponry, in nuclear weapons, if we use the language of our times, in policy making, in bureaucracy, and all these areas which give strength to the political structure of the Ummah. If you're not doing that, these resources and money is wasted. Another example which he gives in the year 517, he says, أقامت زوجة الخليفة المسترشد بالله حفلة ختان لأولادها. The wife of the Khalifa Al-Mustarshid Billah was a symbolic Khalifa only on coins, minting his name on the coins. His wife, she organized the circumcision ceremony of her children. فَزُيِّنَتْ Baghdad. Whole Baghdad was beautified and adorned. وَأُقِيمَتْ بِبَابِ النَّوَى قُبَّةٌ علقت عليها من الديباج والجواهر ما أدهش الأبصار. And they prepared a tomb near this particular door of Baghdad and covered it with silk and jawahir, with precious pearls, which astonished those who would see it. Imagine, such extravagance. Where did you get this money from? This is not the mirath of your forefathers. This is not the inheritance of your forefathers. This is money of the Ummah. And you are spending it extravagantly on the circumcision ceremony of your children. In times when the Ummah is suffering, when people don't have anything to eat. In the year 516, when the Wazir of Sultan Mahmud al-Saljuki, the Saljuki Wazir was killed, was known as Abu Talib. كانت زوجته قد خرجت ومعها 100 جارية بمراكب الذهب. And this Saljuki Wazir, his wife would go on journey with 100 servants, female servants. بمراكب الذهب, in the marakib of dhahab. So imagine, the wife of a wazir, the wife of a minister, would go for a journey with 100 female slaves, female servants. So basically this was the problem. For this reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran has reminded us of the method, or we can say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us the correct Islamic economic policy, how to spend our wealth. See, if you reflect on the Quran, you will not see Allah focusing on the revenue, on the sources of wealth. In fact, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has said this in many ahadith. Lal faqra akhsha alaykum. I don't fear poverty on you. Oh ummah, I don't fear poverty on you. I don't fear that a time will come you will not have any resources. What I fear is that dunya will be expanded for you and it will become a fitna for you. So Quran always focuses on the ways of expenditure, how to spend this wealth. Reflect on the Quran, al-infaq fi sabilillah. The expenditure of zakah, how to give the obligatory charity, how to spend, what are the different areas where you should spend. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not focused on how to accumulate this wealth. Where does this wealth come from? We know that we have to acquire wealth from halal means, but the main focus is how to spend this wealth. So the wealth of the ummah was destroyed on the personal pledges and retaining the chase of power, and it was never used for al-masalih al-amma. It was never used for common benefit of the ummah. So this was a destructive economic policy adopted by both Shia and Sunni rulers in those times. So the Crusaders are at the door, about to destroy us, and we are spending millions and billions on circumcision ceremonies. We never thought of spending on the military might. We never thought of spending on uniting the Muslim world. We never thought of creating economic channels by which we would control the wealth of the world. We never thought about that. We only thought about our own kursi, our own political chair. And if you study the historians of this period, like Al-Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, Al-Imam Ibn Kathir, Al-Imam Ibn Birdi, or others, you will see the same focus, the same examples. So this had evil manifestations on, and again, creating good economic policy is from the intellectual domain. So this means the rulers and their advisors were not thinking. Their only concern was their own chair. If they had prepared the ummah, or they had good thinkers or good economists, if we use our language, who would create economic policy of the Muslim world, the ummah in those times would never suffer. So what happened, the manifestation of this was the ummah suffered. There were common famines and destruction of the markets. The ummah suffered the death, and the famine was very common. So if you study, as I said, these historians, you will find this is the common theme. For example, Al-Imam Ibn Birdi rahimahullah mentions the maja'at, the famine which happened in the year 428 after Hijrah. He says, Jala min Misra khalqun kathirun لما حصل بها لما حصل بها من الغلاء الزائد والجوع الذي لم يعهد مثله في الدنيا. A huge number of people left Misr, left Egypt, and these are the Baghdad, Egypt, and the Asia Minor are the main areas in those times where the Muslim rulers were controlling. So they had to, like in our times, the battles and the wars which happened in our times, the Syrians had to leave. So this problem of immigration was created. Khalqun kathir, a huge number of people left Misr, Egypt, because of al-ghala'u zaid wal-ju', because of hunger and famine which happened. Lam yu'had mithluhu fi dunya, which had no example before in the world. فَإِنَّهُ مَاتَ أَكْثَرُ أَهْلِ مِصْرَ. Imagine, he says, the majority of the people of Misr died. Majority. He does not say a lot of people died. أَكْثَرُ أَهْلِ مِصْرَ. Majority of the Egyptians died. وَأَكَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ بَعْضًا. And they ate each other because of hunger. They ate the corpses. Imagine. وَأَظْهَرُوا عَلَى بَعْضِ التَّبَّاخِينَ أَنَّهُ ذَبَحَ عِدَّةً مِنَ الصِّبْيَانِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَأَكَلَ لُحُومَهُمْ. And some of them even slaughtered children and women and ate their meat. And he's a contemporary historian. He's writing in those times. وباعها بعد أن طبخها وأكلت الدواب بأسرها وبيع الكلب ب5 دنانير والسنور ب3 دنانير. Even animals were sold. Dog was sold for 5 dinars. The cats were sold for 3 dinar. One cat, 3 dinar. Imagine. So the ruler, his wife, is spending millions on the circumcision ceremony of the wife of the Khalifa, spending millions on the circumcision ceremony of her children, and the Ummah is eating each other. Ummah is eating corpses. Imagine. In the year 440, another example, انتشر الطاعون بالموصل والجزيرة والعراق. In 440 after Hijrah, طاعون spread in Iraq, in the Arabian Peninsula, وبلغت الموتى 300,000. And those who died in this طاعون were, the number exceeded 300,000. وصلي مرة واحدة على 400 نفس. And so many people died that one time janaza was prayed on 400 people. So one janaza for 400 people together, because we don't have time. So many people were dying in this, in these times. So between 448 and 449 after Hijrah, عم الوباء والقحط مصر والعراق والشام وصائر أرجاء العالم الإسلامي. The famine and the disease covered whole Muslim world, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and the major parts of the Muslim world. فأكل الناس الميتة من الحيوانات ونبشوا قبور الموتى من البشر. Imagine, he says that the people, because of hunger and due to desperation, they ate the dead in the graves. They would pull the dead from the graves and eat them. أما الأغنياء, as for the rich, the ruling class, فكانوا يشترون الرمان والسفرجل بدينار. They would buy one fruit, pomegranate, for example, for 1 dinar. So they wouldn't care. People were eating corpses, people were eating dead from the graves. So there are many examples of this economic destruction which happened, and the diseases which spread, destruction of people, the migrations in these years, in 449, 470, 511, and all these local historians, those who were writing in those times or near those times, they have mentioned and focused on this. So what was the reason? The reason was economic despotism. So if we summarize this here, we can say economic despotism of the ruling class. Which led to the destruction of the Muslim world, no economic policy, the wealth of the Muslim world, resources were destroyed, they were not utilized in an innovative manner to develop the Ummah. Now have a look, we are not in such desperation, may Allah protect us. We faced Corona and we did better than the West. We are not in such desperation like what has been picturized in the history books of this period. However, the problem is the same. When we are not developed economically, the West is controlling our economies, we don't have our independent economic institutions. The best we gave in this century is Islamic banking, which is a patchwork of the same vigor. What do you expect? So some rulers who want to do something, but they are muzdar. They're desperate. They don't have enough resources. They have reached a point where they cannot do anything. And there are others who don't want to do anything. Moving from this to another area of manifestation, which is the social corruption, or the corruption of the society, the social domain. So in the social area, what happened was, and they're interconnected. I'm mentioning them together because everything is interconnected. My economic condition will affect my thinking levels, patterns of thinking. My social condition will affect my political maturity. So all these social realities are connected, intertwined. Okay. So sometimes we must search for economic backwardness in the social domain, or political immaturity in the economic area. So these are intertwined. What happened in the social was decline in the ummatic conscience. We lost the ummatic conscience, this togetherness. Decline in the ummatic conscience. Which was replaced with tribalism or nationalism. But using tribalism is better, because nationalism as an ideology developed later. Nationalism. We focused on the community conscience, one ummah, one body. We mentioned this in the previous session. And this has been emphasized in the Quran. We don't need to mention ayat and ahadith. The Prophet ﷺ declared us one body. Thinking and acting like one body, one unit, is important. So the decline in the intellectual area led to the destruction of this idea of the ummah. And we said that ummah is not the physical existence of a group. We mentioned the meanings of the term ummah itself from the Quran. So uniting on an idea, uniting on a worldview, living and dying for it, standing for it, sacrificing everything for it. This is the meaning of the ummah. So in this age and time, this idea of ummah was destroyed, and the ruling class, including their armies and supporters and the people were focused on consolidating their empire, their rule. Because the umbrella of the ummah, the umbrella political entity, which was the Khilafah, had already become disintegrated. It was symbolic, the Abbasid Khilafah. We were divided into small states. And all these rulers, they were focused on how to save and protect their entities without reflecting on creating bigger unities. For this reason, after the founders of these small empires, whether Seljuks or Fatimids or others, their empires did not survive for long, because they had not inculcated this idea of the ummah in their children, in their families, in their progeny. So most of these people, their empires disintegrated after their death, like the Seljuks. The brothers fought each other, killed each other. Okay, this was the problem. And this is true for even the great Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. This is a very important point here. We will come to that, inshallah. We'll come to that age. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, the greatest military commander and the tip of the iceberg, as we said, the fruit of this revival. After he left this dunya, he divided his kingdom, the Ayyubid dynasty, the Ayyubid kingdom, between his children. He did not have any proper political idea and policy. And this needs more research. And what happened after that? Of course, it is not difficult to it is not difficult to take a guess about that. They fought each other, and eventually the Ayyubid dynasty did not survive for long. So the fitan and the political struggles between these small empires, which happened, and as I said, one particular entity was disintegrated into further parts and branches. This led to the destruction of the Ummah. For example, Al-Imam Ibn Athir, in his history, Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh, mentions about this time, the year 470. He says that the fitan, the strife between Muslims, between these small entities, it reached such a level that they destroyed each other. ورفع العامة ورفع العامة الصلبان وهجموا على الوزير في حجرته وأكثروا من الكلام الشنيع وجرى من النهب والقتل والفساد أمور عظيمة. Killing, fasad, corruption, destruction between each other. We're not talking about disbelievers destroying us. Disbelievers have not come into the picture yet. Crusaders will come, and they are at the door. And instead of uniting and managing our differences, we are destroying each other. And this fitna was common in the streets of Baghdad. He says this was common in all the areas of Baghdad. In the Babul Basra, Ahlul Karkh, Suqul Madrasa, all these different areas which were famous in those times in Baghdad, and Baghdad was the capital city of the Khilafah. This fitna, fasad, was very common. So the social life of people in those times became unstable. Theft, destruction, fitna, and shift of focus from big to trivial matters. This is another point here. The society was destroyed by shift of focus from important matters of the Ummah to trivial matters. Yes. This is our trivial matters. For example, again, Al-Imam Ibn Athir mentions the fitan which happened in Dimashq, Syria, in 461, which led to the destruction of Al-Masjid Al-Umawi, the famous Umayyad Masjid. He says, وقع بدمشق حرب بين المغاربة أصحاب المصريين أي الفاطميين والمشارقة أصحاب العباسيين. There was a civil war which happened between the Fatimids, the supporters of the Fatimid Empire, and the supporters of the Abbasid Empire. Imagine, the Abbasids, they are also from Ahlul Bayt. And Fatimids also claim that we are from Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet ﷺ. فضربوا دارا مجاورة للجامع بالنار فاحترقت واتصلت بالجامع. They burned the masjid. The masjid was destroyed. So this happened in the year 461. Abu Shama, another great muhaddith and historian who was writing in the same age, he gives, and this, wallahi, this depicts, and this is true with our times also. He gives a statement which summarizes the problem of their times. He says in his book on history, Kitab al-Rawdatain, he says, وَكَانُوا كَالْجَاهِلِيَّةِ, the people, the society was like Jahiliyyah, like the ignorance before Islam. هِمَّةُ أَحَدِهِمْ بَطْنُهُ وَفَرْجُهُ. The main concern of everyone was his stomach and his private part, like in our times. Where is the Ummah? What is happening? What now is happening in Jabalia refugee camp, what happened yesterday, every day we are seeing it on our televisions, Al Jazeera. The Ummah should be on the streets in the Muslim world. On the streets, creating pressure on the rulers to stop the genocide, which we are watching live and enjoying our lives. Imagine if they were our children. They are our children, but we are enjoying our lives. A small, minuscule section of the society is uneasy and trying to protest. Why aren't we outside the American embassies protesting? Whole Ummah, everywhere, in Egypt, in Syria. Let's forget about the conflict zones. We have in the Muslim world, we have the stable countries as well. In Turkey, in Egypt, in the Gulf, no one cares. We're all afraid. And if some people go out, they are a minuscule minority. They are noticed and maybe harmed in some countries. So he says, defining the social structure and the social reality of those times, Jahiliyyah. Himmatu ahadihim batnuhu wa farjuhu. The main concern of everyone was his stomach and his private part, fulfilling his desires. لا يعرف معروفا ولا ينكر منكرا. No one was enjoining good or forbidding evil. In another quote by also another contemporary historian, Ibn Jubayr, who was a famous traveler. He codified the history of this time. He says, وَلْيَتَحَقَّقِ الْمُتَحَقِّقُ وَيَعْتَقِدُ الصَّحِيحَ الْإِعْتِقَادِ. Everyone should believe in certainty that أنه لا إسلام إلا ببلاد المغرب لأنهم على جادة واضحة. There is no Islam. Islam is non-existent except in the western part of the Muslim world in those times. وما سوى ذلك مما بهذه الجهات المشرقية. What has remained in the eastern part, it is only فأهواء وبدع, desires and innovations, وفرق ضالة, and deviant sects. إلا من عصم الله عز وجل من أهلها, except those who are protected by Allah, which are a small minority. We can say the same. Where is Islam? Where is honor? Where is sharaf? Where is the ghairah of the Muslim world, of the Muslims? We are sleeping. Our only concern is our stomachs and fulfilling our desires, except illa man rahima rabbuk, except a minuscule minority. Let's stop here, inshallah. For today's session, we will continue the discussion about the manifestations of intellectual decline in the next session with the shawahid, with the examples from the history, original sources compiled in those times. And let us take lessons and understanding from this period of history for our times. And taking lessons from history means that we don't repeat the same mistakes. We don't fall into the same traps. As the Prophet ﷺ said, a mu'min, a true believer, is not bitten from the same hole twice. We don't repeat the same mistake. We elevate ourselves, we think We may not be the rulers, but Allah has given us different capabilities. Allah has given me the capability of speaking, of writing, of engaging intellectually. Allah may have given you some other capacity, some other capability. Work according to your istita'ah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help and aid the people of Palestine and all occupied nations of the world, Muslims and oppressed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us understanding of our problems, give us tawfiq of uplifting ourselves and the ummah intellectually first, and then in all areas of human life. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His beautiful names and exalted attributes to cure our sick, accept our martyrs, and forgive all our dead. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala nabi al-ummi. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you have any questions, write briefly relevant questions to the topic. You can write briefly in the chat box. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير. Let's meet in the next session بإذن الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.